Good, we're good to go. Great. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight as we welcome artists and esteemed faculty member here at St. Petersburg College, Jennifer Guess. My name is Sarah Felice. I am the curator here at the Leepa Ratner Museum of Art. This is actually my first faculty exhibition at the museum here. So it's been a pleasure to get to know Jennifer these last few months, her work, and her dedication to enriching the lives of our students. Jennifer Guest was born and raised here in Tarpon Springs, Florida. She earned her BFA in studio art from Sam Houston State University in 2006 and an MFA in painting from Texas Christian University in 2014. Concurrently to receiving her formal education, Guest worked in shopping malls, theme parks, and as a birthday party hostess and aerobics instructor. Guest's work is influenced by paperback cover illustrations, didactic drawings and dioramas, Aztec and Maya codices, catalog photographs of consumer goods, conceptual texts, crime novels, postmodern fiction, African sign paintings, and the work of the Flemish Primitives. As an instructor, her goal is to instill and inspire her students with a rigorous work ethic, a curious and experimental approach to learning, strong critical thinking skills, and the confidence to question the material with which they are presented. The opportunity for her to engage a healthy diversity of students is both personally and professionally enriching. Welcome, Jennifer Gibbs.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and thank you for being here. This is my little installation of drawings in the faculty exhibition, which I titled Character Studies. And I'm hoping I can talk about that title a little bit tonight. But all of these portraits were drawn at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. And that was during the Friday afternoon open studio in which a live model poses nude for members of the community who can come in and pay a fee and bring their own art materials and just work independently, but alongside the group of artists. And so I dedicated myself to making these figure studies for the past couple of years. And I'm really grateful to the models because, you know, they're placing themselves in a really vulnerable position for our benefit. And they're really hardworking. It's a really hard job, and they're also very talented too. But I'm also really grateful to the artists that I got to work alongside because even though I was often frustrated and irritated that I felt like the other people in the open studio weren't taking the drawing session really seriously and, you know, treating it with the gravity it deserved, it was a really invaluable experience for me to get to work alongside these other people and see how the drawing process is investigated with other hands and other minds. So, you know, during this time, during these few years that I've been making these figure studies, I've really been thinking about the process of drawing and drawing as a verb rather than as a noun. You know, so drawing is like a process, an experiment, rather than drawing as like a finished product. And like, you know, like the means, you know, I'm thinking about drawing as like a means, not to an end, but as a means in and of itself, I guess. So the drawing sessions are 2.5 hours long, which amounts to about 2 hours of drawing total, because with the sometimes excessive socializing that happens and the model has to take breaks and everything. So all of these drawings were, you know, produced in about 2 hours, but I'm going to talk about the process that they had to undergo after the drawing session. But even though the finished drawings kind of have that like unfinished quality, they were much more unfinished than this when I left the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. So, oh, I forgot to show my little image of, there it is, it's in Dunedin, right? And they have all kinds of like workshops, and they have open studio also on Monday night, and they have open studio with nude models, and they have portrait workshops. So it's a really fun community center. But so I would, you know, spend my 2 hours drawing in the open studio, but, you know, they were very much more unfinished than they are today. So sometimes I would come home and continue to work like immediately after the session. And then sometimes I wouldn't readdress them for months. I don't know, out of like frustration or just getting busy. So sometimes a model would offer to allow me to take a photograph of them before they dismounted the stage and before we called the session finished for the day, so that I could continue working from some kind of like reference image. And I always accepted their offer and took a photograph, but I never ended up actually referring back to the photograph, because after getting to work from a live model, working from my really inexpert photograph seemed really boring and like a little sad or something. But during my first, and here's this is Rolando, by the way. So the image on the left is what the drawing looked like at the end of the session. And then the image on the right is like what I added to it at home later. And this is all just like from imagination or memory or whatever you call it. I don't know. I just kind of had to like make it up. And I'm hoping that like my imaginings and my memory gave it like an interesting, I don't know, gave them like quirky, interesting qualities. But during my first few sessions there at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center, I was a party to like the total chaos of the start of the session. You know, like we're all clattering in with our plein air easels under one arm, and then like a huge drawing board and a giant newsprint pad in the other arm. We're like clutching our tackle boxes with drawing tools and materials in our teeth and stuff. And everyone's like arriving like 5 minutes into the first pose and, you know, drop a pencil box, and it's like total chaos. So I thought, if I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to have to take a different approach. So I decided to really kind of minimize my art materials. And I bought myself an 11 by 14 inch pad of Stonehenge paper, drawing paper. And then I decided to just work with a really limited palette of colors. So I went through my Prismacolor colored pencil set, and I picked, you know, I decided I would work with like one warm hue and one cool hue. So I chose 2 reds, pink rose and black cherry, and then 1 blue, which is light cerulean. And yeah, and so I stuck to those 3 colors. And I kind of like to think that because I'm using a warm hue and a cool hue, and I do have a couple of different values, like I have a lighter pink and then a darker red, that the colors kind of optically mix. So not quite like the technique that the Impressionists would use, but you know, kind of thinking along, you know, in that vein, like the French Impressionists, especially like the Pointillists, would lay down, you know, not a green dot, but maybe like a blue dot next to a yellow dot. And then from far away, the 2 colors would optically mix, right? So they were never like physically mixed. And then sometimes I, you know, decided to switch it up, and I picked a different palette of 3 pencils. So that's the drawings made with like the brown palette, or just with a different set of 3 pencils. So I packed these 3 colored pencils along with an eraser and a small handheld pencil sharpener and a wooden skewer stick, which I use for citing proportions and angles. And then an index card that has a rectangular hole cut out of the middle, which I use as a viewfinder. I packed all that into a small zipper pouch, and then I could come into the session with all of my materials in one hand and pay my $15 to the studio monitor, and then try to find a seat which wouldn't get me accused of blocking anyone's view, right? And my impetus for starting, you know, for attending these open studio sessions was to develop and hone my own drawing skills. You know, I teach drawing, so I feel a little bit of an obligation, but I also just really enjoy the drawing process. And I think it's meditative. You know, I think some people describe it as calming. I've had students describe it as calming before, but I don't think it's calming at all. But I think it's meditative in the way that you cannot really think of anything else when you're drawing, especially if there's a time limit and you're, you know, with a live model. You know, it feels like furious, like kind of desperate in a way, but you really can't think of anything else. And I think that's what meditation is, right? So, but at the time I had been kind of investigating more fantastical or surreal subject matter and imagery. And this is a set of 3 drawings from a larger body of work that I had created, which I called Accurate Descriptions. And the idea was that I was going to make all these, they're pretty large drawings too. Like the one in the center is 30 inches tall by 40 inches tall, which isn't like a huge artwork in the grand scheme of things, but for the application process, it's pretty big. Like these are all colored pencil drawings. So, and then the 2 vertically oriented drawings on either side are 30 inches by 20 inches. But I made a whole series of drawings which were meant to hang in a long stripe on the wall. So I made them all at dimensions that they could like fit together with like a clean line at the top and a clean line at the bottom. Because I was hoping that they would read kind of like a comic strip, or that it would imply that there was a narrative involved, that there was like some kind of left to right reading. And then the images themselves were kind of like disparate, like not obviously connected, but I thought that was also kind of fun. Like, I don't know, like maybe like laying tarot cards out, you know, how like you play with tarot cards, there's all these like disparate images and you have to try to form a story together. So, but then, you know, as I was working at Open Studio and drawing these live models, I thought, is there anything really more interesting than just another human being? I mean, what more interesting subject matter is there? So I think that we have like no greater privilege than to study other people. And then another shift I made at this time was trying to shed myself of the impulse to erase. So I carried an eraser with me, but I forced myself to reserve it only for those lines that got so out of control that they were really distracting. So because I was thinking now about drawing as a verb, you know, I was trying to meditate on a drawing's ability to tell a story, but not in the way an image can tell a story through pictorial allegory, like in those last drawings I showed you, but how a drawing can tell the story of its own creation, you know, how it actually came into being, about its stages and its phases and its evolution. So all of the marks and lines that we put down on the paper, these lines that we put down which aren't correct, but instead are searching out or seeking out the truth, those lines that we call process lines, those are the lines that tell the story of the making of the thing. So a drawing can tell its own origin story. Isn't that what we all want? Like, I think we all want to be able to tell our origin story. And I think this is how the process of drawing can reflect so much of our human experience, because we put a lot of like mental and emotional effort into developing and reciting our own origin stories. So speaking of origin stories, here's mine, sort of. So as Sarah said, I was born and raised in Tarpon Springs, the sponge capital of the world. I played at Craig Park and I participated in sponge festival parades, and I attended annual Epiphany ceremonial cross dives and dressed up for special occasion meals at campuses. And I also regularly visited the Tarpon Springs Public Library with my grandmother, who was an avid reader. And this was the public library in my childhood, but now it's the Tarpon Springs Heritage Museum. But I thought the building was really beautiful, and they also always had like such beautiful landscaping. And then right across the little road is Craig Park with the most aggressive squirrels you can imagine. But it was a lot of fun. We'd go there regularly, and this is where I developed my like thirst for the written word and became an avid reader myself, except for like a regrettable few years in college when I read nothing but textbooks, if that. But I still read a lot today. But when I was a kid, not only did I read a lot of novels, wanted to share this image, sorry. But this is a painting that actually hangs in the Tarpon Springs Public Library. It's called Changing Tides by an artist named Christopher Still. I just think this painting's amazing, so I thought I'd share it. But not only did I read a lot of novels as a kid, but I was like a voracious consumer of all kinds of media, you know, television, radio, movies. I really loved sitcoms from the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and like found it really frustrating when my peers didn't appreciate my Halloween costumes, like the year I dressed up as Rhoda Morgenstern from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I had to explain that one, and then it still didn't go over because I guess you got to know the show, right? But I was a really big fan of a few local radio stations. I had somehow developed a taste for like oldies music as a kid, and I'm not sure how, but this was I think this station is still around, but U92, that was our oldie station. And I would regularly call this oldie station to make song requests. And I frequently actually got on the radio making songs, and then it became like an addiction. Like I had to get on the radio like at all costs. But when I was like 9 and I was calling the oldie station and requesting something by Herman's Hermits, I think adults just thought that was like kind of cute and novel. So my request would get played on the air, and it was like a drug. So I like spent my whole preteen and teenage existence like just trying to figure out ways to get on the radio. Like the Power Pig 93.3 was another one. But later when I was a teenager, I had to like up the ante in terms of my antics. I couldn't just like cutely call in and request like an oldies track, but I had to like talk in a funny voice or say something ridiculous, use my prank phone call skills, I guess. But I really loved song lyrics and television and movie characters because they gave me opportunities to just try on different attitudes and outlooks. So I had all these like different characters, these personas, attitudes, and outlooks inside of me. And because I also had the impulse to live them all out, if only for a moment, I kind of gained a reputation amongst my peers as someone who could do impersonations and accents and just like as a ham in general. And I was never actually quite comfortable with that characterization because I felt like I was essentially a shy person, but kids would tell adults like teachers and parents about my antics and then expect me to perform for them. And sometimes I grudgingly complied, but it never had like, the zeal of the original performance because I wasn't an actor. I was just reacting to like these spontaneous impulses to identify with the characters that I held inside my memory. So sometimes I refused to perform, which annoyed my friends. And I remember making one friend mad because I wouldn't perform my Tina Turner impression for our teacher. I just thought that was like too much, too far. But I did like making people laugh though, and whether it was with me or at me, it didn't really matter. But the adults around me began to recognize that I was willing to make a fool of myself. And then I found myself frequently assigned to these roles that I didn't necessarily want, like reading aloud in front of the class or like tap dancing on a stage or singing a solo in front of an auditorium of parents and students. So that brings me to the First United Methodist Church at Tarpon Springs. So even though my family didn't go to church, I somehow ended up spending a lot of time at this church. And in humble Christian fashion, this is actually the photograph they have on their website. Like they don't even have a proper, like a professional photograph. I'm sure this is like from Google Maps or something, this aerial view, but that was like the best picture of the church I could find, but it's on Tarpon Avenue. And I guess I ended up spending a lot of time there because a lot of my friends and their families went to this church and were really involved. So I intermittently attended Sunday school and youth group meetings and Wednesday night spaghetti dinners. And then for several years, I attended an after-school program called Church Express, which picked us up from Tarpon Springs Fundamental Elementary School on Wednesday afternoons in a big brown bus with mustard yellow lettering. And then, of course, there was Vacation Bible School every summer, too. So one year, the church decided to put on a children's play. It was a musical, actually. And it was titled Zeros into Heroes, the Story of Gideon. And we were all encouraged to audition for a role, but I was not going to get roped into this one. So I didn't even bother learning any lines or looking at the script. I did not plan to audition. But my friend Kristen, she wanted to audition for a small role, and she talked me into accompanying her to her audition, as she was too nervous to go alone. I don't know if you can see where the story is going, but she read her lines and she got her, her small part that she wanted. And then the youth minister, who was now doubling as like casting director, he asked me what role I was going to read for. And I said that I was just there for moral support. I wasn't going to audition. And he said that if I was there, I should audition. And I argued that I hadn't learned any lines and that I hadn't even looked at the script. And he just looked at me and said, well, what else have you got? Give me something. And of course, my friend Kristen, she says, well, do your Robin Leach impression. So if you're too young or too cool to know who Robin Leach is, he was a British American entertainment journalist. And he hosted a television show, which I think was like a precursor to MTV's Cribs. It was called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And his catchphrase and his sign off was champagne wishes and caviar dreams. So, in the show, they would just, the viewer could take a tour of these like really lavish celebrity homes. So Kristen says, do your Robin Leach impression. And I really didn't want to, but I got talked into it. But the thing is, it wasn't even a good Robin Leach impression. I was just like, I'm Robin Leach, hosting you on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, right? And the youth minister said that if I could do that, I could do anything. Now, remembering it now, I think he may have said if I was willing to do that, I was willing to do anything, but I just accepted it anyway. And I was like, I'm really, really good at this. So that is how I landed the lead in my church musical, Zeros into Heroes, the story of Gideon. And this is a self-portrait I drew of myself in costume. So I imagine that the church was going to have a marquee outside of it, like advertising the musical. And this was my suggestion for the poster image. But my arms in this splayed position are supposed to indicate that I'm in the throes of performance, right? So, but that's what my costume looked like. So I played a young Hebrew man who was visited by an angel of God and told that I was a leader of men and that I was to gather together a ragtag army to defend Israel. Right? And then I succeeded and became like a great leader of men. So this is my costume. And I guess, the story goes that he was like a humble farmer from a really humble family. And so when he was approached by the angel of God, he was like, but why me? Why me? And one of my lines that I had to sing was, my family isn't very important, and I am the least of all. But so I actually had a lot of fun in that play, and it's like a really great memory of mine. So I still read a lot of fiction, and my favorite types of novels are the ones where like very little in common with the protagonist. I really love crime novels, and especially a crime novel where the protagonist is the criminal, and then especially when the criminal is also the narrator, because it allows me to like step into their shoes. And this is one of my favorite authors. His name is Donald E. Westlake, and then this is like one of my favorite books of his, Being Held Prisoner. So in the story, a group of prisoners conspires to dig a tunnel under the prison so that they can like journey out into the outside world. But the plan is not to escape prison, because then if they got caught, then their prison sentences would be extended, right? And it could be really dangerous too. But the idea is that they would dig this tunnel so they can journey into the outside world and rob some banks. And because they figured like they have a perfect alibi, I mean, how could it have been them? They're in prison. But the story is really funny. The whole book is really funny, actually. And so they're journeying through this tunnel daily, I guess, to make preparations for the robbery. And as long as they're back in time for bed checks at night, they're safe. But while they're taking their daily trips to the outside world, they end up like forming these mainstream lives outside of prison. So they get girlfriends and wives, and they even get jobs and stuff. And then they just come back to prison every night. And so I was thinking that, this book was giving me like this meta experience. I don't know if that's the right term, but so I was like stepping into the shoes of the criminal, and the criminals like stepping into the shoes of the mainstream citizen. So it seems kind of meta. I don't know if that's the right term, but. So I think that's what I've always liked about reading fiction, is that a really well-written character allows you to slip into their shoes. And when a story or a character captures your imagination in a really profound way, it becomes part of your identity, like a childhood memory. But memory is a really funny and kind of unreliable thing for sure. And so I'm actually not even sure of how much I've told you about my childhood is factual. So it's just my memory of it. But I'm always really surprised and then, kind of surprised and embarrassed and a little disturbed by how often my memory fails me, like how distorted my memory can be. And it's like, the subterfuge of memory is really apparent to me when I draw from observation, because it's really, it's kind of scary in a way, how much information is lost in the amount of time it takes me to move my eyes from the subject to the paper. It's like so much is lost in that short amount of time. But I think what's so interesting about drawing from observation is that even when we have a live model right in front of us, our drawings are influenced by our own subjective perceptions, which is why a person looks 10 different ways when drawn by 10 different artists. And well, in these two examples, these were drawn by two of my buddies at Open Studio. On the left, Zoe Pappas, who teaches workshops at Dunedin Fine Arts Center. And then Chris Thomas, who's just been attending for a long time. He also doubles as a model when we need him. But one day our model didn't show, so we posed for each other for like 20-minute portraits. And Zoe drew the one of me on the left, and then Chris drew the one of me on the right. And I think it's interesting that even though the two drawings look totally different from each other, I think they both look like me. So it's amazing because like drawing is this mission of fact finding. We're all trying to find like proportions and angles, but that fact finding mission is really colored by our subjective perceptions too. So I tried to describe this in my artist statement. And I said that drawing from direct observation is a mission of fact finding. Sometimes the facts are elusive or overlooked. Sometimes the facts are diminished or exaggerated. When our drawings are successful, it is because we have combined the facts we've discovered with our personal, subjective, and sometimes subconscious perceptions, unveiling more than mere facts, larger universal truths. These figure studies make up a small portion of my own 4 years long fact-finding mission, documenting a singular reality. And so this subject of subjectivity, or maybe I could say the subject of the subjectivity we're subject to, makes me think about artist and longtime Yale professor Joseph Albers. He differentiated between that which is factual and that which is actual. So at SPC's Clearwater campus, our 2D design curriculum draws from the color theory exercises outlined in Joseph Albers' manual, Interaction of Color. And here's an image of the cover of that book. And then thanks to Professor Kim Kirchman, this is because of Kim Kirchman's hard work, really, because during, the campus closures of 2020, when the pandemic was declared, Kim had to basically tear down the entire 2D design curriculum and then build it up from scratch again. But these color exercises outlined in Interaction of Color were kind of perfect for remote teaching and learning because they're to be made, or it's highly recommended they be made with cut colored paper rather than through laborious processes of mixing paint, which requires not only expensive paints, but a dedicated studio area and other expensive tools. So these could be made, at home with just a small surface area to work from. And another benefit of working with cut colored paper is that you can perform a ton of color exercises, a lot of color experiments in a relatively short period of time compared to a more laborious process of paint mixing. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about Joseph Albers because just reading his manual and listening to interviews of Joseph Albers, I really think that his, assertions about the act of art making as being like experimental, and that experimentation and process is more important than the finished product. I think this has really been like working itself over in my brain, when thinking about making these drawings from life. So Joseph Albers and his wife Annie Albers, they were both members of the Bauhaus group in Germany in the 1920s until the school was shut down by the Nazis. And then in 1933, the Alberses moved to the United States to teach at Black Mountain College, which is an experimental liberal arts college in North Carolina. And 1933 was actually the inaugural year of Black Mountain College. And when I was doing this research, I learned something really interesting. I couldn't believe it. Okay, so the guy or the guys who founded Black Mountain College were faculty members at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. And John Andrew Rice was a philosophy professor at Rollins College. And I guess he had kind of radical views and lots of disagreements with administration about academic issues and academic freedom, right? So he was dismissed. And then he recruited another faculty member from Rollins named Theodore Dreyer, and they recruited a few students. And then they founded Black Mountain College. And the year it opened, they had a student body of only 26. But here's like some fun photographs I found online of like some of the stuff they were getting up to at Black Mountain College. I think at the top right, I think that's a photography class. Although I had read so many times, like so many of Joseph Albers' former students talked about his leaf exercise, where I guess they'd go outside and collect leaves. So I wasn't sure if that was like one of his, they were doing his leaf exercise, but I do see cameras. So I think this is photography class. And then, I guess some modern dance there. But yeah, after teaching at Black Mountain College for a while, both Joseph and Annie Albers, then Joseph Albers was offered a faculty position at Yale. So, and he taught there until he died in 1976. But he brought with him to Yale his experimental approach that he learned at the Bauhaus and then continued to, use at Black Mountain College. And, I think people considered his teaching style pretty revolutionary. So he really felt that in art making, ideas are born of material and perceptual possibilities and limitations. And so he encouraged, one of his former students said that he didn't allow discussion in class. This was not a back and forth thing. This is me like professing to you and you listening kind of thing. But his students said that he inspired a lot of discussion outside of the classroom too, amongst themselves. So, the manual that he created, this was for his students at Yale. It's been, has had a really profound impact on the teaching of art and design all around the world. And so this is what we draw from at SPC. So I like to frequently remind our students that they are getting a Yale education in our design classes, at least. But, Joseph Albers always talked about the subjectivity of perception, and particularly about like the relativity of color. So he talked about that color is almost never seen as it really is, right? We're always seeing it in some kind of context, which is coloring our perception of a color. And this is an example of the phenomenon known as simultaneous contrast. So in this image, which is from the manual, we can see two, I guess they're not perfect rectangles, but two purple stripes on either side of the composition. The purple stripe at left looking like the dark purple, and then the purple stripe at the right looking like a lighter, like a lavender. But the two purples are actually the exact same color. If we could lift that flap right there, we'd see that it's just one single piece of paper, but the colors surrounding the stripes are affecting our perception of them. So we perceive that one as being dark, or at least I do. We perceive that one as being light. And the effect is really amazing. So just thinking about like subjectivity and perception, I thought I'd share with you a little video. This is not my video. I just found this on YouTube. But this video silently demonstrates this, this phenomenon of simultaneous contrast. So what you'll see is a yellow rectangle on a black ground to start. And then the background color is going to change at intervals. So in the first image, with yellow rectangle on a black ground, we'll be able to perceive the yellow rectangle free of any context. So we can see the yellow rectangle in its factual state. And then as the background color changes, our perception of that yellow rectangle is going to change. So in some instances, the yellow rectangle might appear more orange or more green or darker or lighter. But the important thing to know when you're watching this video is that the yellow rectangle is actually not changing. It's the background color that's changing. This is illustrating Albert's claim that color is the most relative medium in art, meaning that our perception of a color changes dramatically depending on its context. A color is only perceived as dark when we have something lighter to compare it to, and a color is only perceived as warm when we have something cooler to compare it to. And a color is only perceived as bright if we have something duller to compare it to. And this video specifically is illustrating what we call ground subtraction, in which a ground color subtracts its own qualities from another color next to it or on top of it. So a warm ground will subtract warmth from the yellow rectangle, making it look cooler. A bright ground would subtract brightness from the yellow rectangle, making it look duller. A dark ground would subtract darkness from the yellow rectangle, making it look lighter. And it really looks like to me that the yellow rectangle is like pulsing. It even appears to change in size to me too. It's amazing. Sometimes it looks smaller, sometimes it looks bigger. Sometimes it's like really distinct from the background, and sometimes it kind of melts into it. So, the actual, he differentiated between factual and actual, and the fact of that yellow rectangle could be seen when we saw it on the black ground with no context. But then the actual yellow rectangle was what we saw in tons of different ways when placed on top of different colors. And so the actual is what we get when we place the factual in an influencing context and mix it with the subjectivity of human perception. I love this stuff. So I thought, I have just a few more of my own images to show you, but I thought I would just finish by hopefully leaving my fellow artists with a little encouragement. I talked before about how I was really investigating some kind of fantastical or surreal subject matter, which is fun, and I'm sure I'm going to go back to that one day. But I think there's a lot of pressure on us artists to come up with like interesting subject matter. And I think currently, relevant is synonymous with interesting. But I think, if anybody ever feels afraid to approach subject matter that seems like done over or just done to death, I think you should consider that that you have your own, unique subjective experience to contribute to that, boring old subject matter. And I feel like that's what I think I've discovered from making these figure studies, and I hope that like my own like subjective perceptions add like an interesting quality to these figure studies. But I thought I would share with you two snippets of a couple of musical performances that I thought illustrated this idea. So we have the Rolling Stones and Devo both performing Satisfaction. And so I guess what you'll see, or what I'm hoping you'll see, is that they took the same song, essentially. It's got the same lyrics, the same basic melody, but they give it two very different feels. I hated to interrupt that song. I'm so sorry. But okay, so here's Devo performing their version. Totally different feel. So I guess I would describe the Rolling Stones as like kind of raw and like loose. I don't know if I would have thought of them that way if I hadn't heard the Devo version, but yeah, in comparison, I think the Rolling Stones is really like raw and loose. Here's Devo. Sorry to interrupt that one too. So anyway, and I guess I would describe that as very controlled and like a sense of irony too. I think you know, the Rolling Stones were being maybe punk, and I think they were also being ironic, but Devo has a new approach to irony, right? So anyway, thank you so much for having me. And should I ask if anybody has any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for letting me share my childhood stories. I'm always like desperate for someone to listen to those stories. So I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.